So Zok Gemara, if someone was Makadish, a woman that he had just given chalitza to, Shricha himenu get. Then, if he was Makadish or L'Shem Ishus, if he was Makadish or L'Shem Ishus, he would have to give a get. So of course we're not talking according to Rabbi Kiva, who holds Ein Kedushin Toisim B'Chai V'Lavin. We must be going according to the Shita that Kedushin is Toisim B'Chai V'Lavin. So if it was L'Shum Ishos, Tzricha Menu get, L'Shum Yevamos or Yevamos, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Ein Tzricha Menu get. And the Gemara explained a couple of reasons of what the svara is, but at one point in the Gemara, which we last discussed, was since you are trying to create only a mimer on top of a zika, and at this point there is no zika anymore because chalitza was already done, therefore it's a mistaken transaction and it doesn't work. The Chachamim bein shekitchel l'sham ishos, bein shekitchel l'sham Yevamos or Yevamos, tzricha heimenu get. Regardless, we say you meant the regular kedushin, so your words didn't come out so perfectly, but the kedushin will be chal. So the Gemara had a couple of different svaras to explain Rebbe. One was it's like you're trying to be either it's like you're doing malacha in what you think is your field, and it turns out that it was a field of a ger shemes. You're not going to be koine because again you're not trying to be koine. You're just doing some farming work or some repair work. So that wouldn't constitute a kinyan. On that, Abaye said it doesn't make sense to say that because in the case of Oide B'Nichse Ager, you didn't have any kavana at all to be koine. You were just doing work. Here, you do want to be koine. You want to make a kedushin. You're just doing it in the wrong fashion. Who said that wouldn't work? So therefore, Abaye had a different shot in Rebbe, and what Abaye said, Achab Ma'iskinon Kagoyin the Amar Lahaskachli the Maimer Yavam. He said, I want my kedushin to be a mimer. I don't want it to be a kedushin. I want it to be a mimer. So there, Rebbe holds, if mimer goes on top of the zika, if mimer just enhances the zika, well, then you need there to be a zika there in order for the mimer to work. But since the chalitza had already been done, there is no mimer. There's no zika for the mimer to enhance, and therefore there's no place for a kinyan to be chal. Rabban Sabi, which is a sver we had earlier yesterday in the morning, that the mimer is not enhancing and bonding with and forging with the existing zika. Rather, there's two parallel tracks of marriage, of joining. One is through zika, one is through kedushin, and one could stand without the other. So that kedushin part can stand even though there's no longer zika. Okay, beautiful. Zok the Gemara, Rava had a third svar, and that's where we're up to today, which is 4 lines from the bottom on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, the svar of Rava. Zok the Gemara, Rava Amar, Ida Amar La B'Maimer Yevamim. If the word he used was B'Maimer Yevamim, I want to make a kedushin that's like the Maimer for Yevamim. Kula Amal Pligi de Mahanya. Even Rebbe would agree that works because it's still a kedushin, even though it's a misplaced kedushin because there's no zika here, but it will still work to make a kedushin even though there's no zika over here. But the hagavamayskinon kagoin do amala hiskacheli bezikas yivam. I want you to be mekadesh to be kodesh to me with the zika of yivam. So let's see what Rashi said, what Tosfos says, and then we'll see the Gemara that elaborates on this shaila, explaining what it is. So Tosfos, the Amalas Kachali Bezikas Yavamin. One second, it's going a little bit wider. So let's learn the Gemara first, and maybe we'll come back to Tosfos. So not the Gemara. Going to Amar Law is Kachali Bezikas Yavamin. Rabbi Savar. Now we're going to go on to Nun Gimel of Aleph. Rabbi Savar, Yezika, there is Zika. The also Chalitza of Katilasika. And Chalitza comes the chalitza that was prior to this kedushin came and removed the zika. And Rashi says, Yeshika, hide the toughest mimer ba'alma b'chihai lishna. The reason why mimer normally works with hiskacheli b'zikas yavamin is because yezika, there's actually a relationship, a bond already in existence, created by the nefila le'ivah. And then you're just saying, I want to supplement, I want to add to that zika. I want to add to the zika. But the hashta asoy chalitza, but the asoy chalitza, so the chalitza that she received prior to this kedushin, pakata, took away the zika. And therefore, the whole meaning of what she said does not work. For Rabban and Savri, ain't zika. And the Rabban said there was never a zika in the first place. So never could any lashon of kedushin refer and be relevant to some other relationship that it's enhancing. It's always standalone. So therefore, meikara ilu amar la hiskacheli bezikas yavamin. Had he told her even before the chalitza, hiskacheli bezikas yavamin, miloi mahani, would it not have worked? Even though there is no zika for it to be enhancing, hashtanami mahani. Therefore, this lashon does work. So it's a machlokes if this lashon works. If there was a zika that it was based on, then you would interpret the words of hiskacheli bezikas yavamin as I only want to enhance that zika. But if that zika is not there, then the kedushin won't work. But if there wasn't a zika anyway, then the way you would interpret hiskacheli bezikas yavamin is just another way to say kedushin. Therefore, it will work. Let's see Rashi. Yes zika. I'm sorry, we did the first Rashi. The second Rashi, ain't zika, ain't kayachol zika. So once again, Rashi says, like I said earlier, ain't zika doesn't mean there's no zika at all. Of course, there's some type of relationship, some type of bond. It means it doesn't have any potency. Hachi may car have a mimer. Nevertheless, it would have worked to be as a mimer before. And now Toysus will be really very relevant to us. Back at the bottom of Amud Beis, the Rabban said before, even when the chalitza has not yet been performed, if he said "Eskacheli v'zika shevamin milay mahani," tafil l'mandamar ein zika. Even if you hold ein zika, hainu le'inin achosh kukasei. That just means that achosh kukasei won't be a problem with chayotzba. Of a pshita de v'hani loshen zika. The word zika does make sense. Sharei ziku kasei ve'emedes lefanu. So Toshos is sort of reiterating what Rashi says. Ein zika doesn't mean there's no zika. It just means there's certain halachic implications that the zika doesn't create. But there is still a zika. So the word zika makes sense when you're doing kedushin. The question is, do you interpret it as enhancing an existing relationship, which you would have to learn if you hold yei zika? And now that zika is not here because chalitza was already done, there's no merit to what you did. Or is zika just a general term or that's used to describe a relationship, and therefore your hiskacheli b'zika shevamin would be a standalone kedushin, even if it's not connected to anything else. So the Gemara, there's many more opinions as to why Rebbe and the Chachamim would be arguing with each other. Rab Shravi Amar, Rab Shravi said, "V'chalitza kshera." If it was a kosher chalitza, now remember, we once already described what chalitza kshera means. That means if you did chalitza at a time where you had an option to do yibum at that time, meaning you didn't give a get yet, mimer wasn't done on another woman yet, it means chalitza was done before anything else was done. So if there was a proper chalitza done, which totally eliminates the zika, even there, kula alma loy pligi the loy mahad. If there was a real chalitza done, and which totally wiped out the chalitza, everybody would agree it doesn't work. Even the Rabban would be moida to Rebbe that this kedushin didn't work. The chalitza psula kamivli. The machlokes between Rebbe, who holds there's still not a good kedushin, and the chachamim, who hold there is a good kedushin, is by chalitza psula. Mar shavar chalitza psula paiteris. One man holds chalitza psula totally wipes out the zika, which is ready, and therefore the kedushin cannot be chal. Mar shavar chalitza psula ain't a paiteris, and therefore there's still some level of zika there that this loshon would work for. Let's see Rashi. Going to chalatz achar again. First, he gave her a get, and then he gave her the chalitza. There, kamiflically. Rabban Savri lo yafka'at shapir. The chalitza after the get does not effectively, completely remove the zika. And of course, this is only midirabbanan. And therefore, there's still some residue of that original zika, and therefore, therefore the nusach of mimer, of siskachli bezika shevaman, will still work because there's still some type of zika there. Mashenkin, the Rebbe holds no. Rebbe holds there's no mimer there. There's no zika left whatsoever. Excuse me. And therefore, the kedushin will not work. So that was another option of how to learn pshat in the machlokes. I believe this is option number 3, and now we're going to look at option number 4. Rav Ashi Omar, the chula alma chalitza psula eina piters. Everybody else, the chalitza psula does not totally wipe out the zika midrabanan, and therefore everybody would agree that the kedushin would work. The reason why there's a shaila that the kedushin doesn't work over here is the question is, what if I tell a woman, I'm going to give you chalitza, but only if you pay me $1,000? And then she says, okay, fine, no problem, but I need the chalitza. So I give her the chalitza, and then she says, are you kidding me? I'm not paying you $1,000, you lowlife. You asked me for $1,000. I'm not going to give you a penny. So the question is, since I gave the chalitza on the t'nai, is my chalitza effective or not? So will a t'nai be effective on chalitza? And Rashi says, okay, I was more aggressive. Rashi says he only asked for 200 zuz. I said $1,000. Rabbi Savar ain't t'nai moil b'chalitza. The t'nai doesn't impact the chalitza, and therefore, even if she didn't pay him, ain't t'nai moil. The t'nai would not damage the prior chalitza. Now the chalitza, and the chalitza is good. If there's a chalitza here, there's no more zika. Therefore, if he made kedushin afterwards and he used a loshen zika shivamin, which means that it has to be built upon existing zika, it won't work. The afkata zikasai, because the tanai had no impact and the chalitza was chal, so there's no zika for the kedushin to be chal upon. Ulu Rabbanon yesh t'nai, but Rabbanon holds that there is a t'nai, and therefore the chalkaima d'loy kaima, since she didn't, and as long as she doesn't fulfill that t'nai, in other words, until she pays him, loy paka zika, the zika will not go away, and therefore v'chi omer lo askachli ayde kesev zeh v'zika shebamin kani, because in fact there is a zika there because she has not yet fulfilled her obligation to give him the $200. Ravina Amar, so that was pshat number 5, I guess, and now we have to pshat number 6. Ravina Amar, the chul alma yesh t'nai b'chalitza. Everybody else, the t'nai is enforceable, but the question is, what if you didn't do the t'nai as a textbook t'nai, and that is a t'nai kafel. The definition of a t'nai kafel is, if you pay me $200, then my chalitza will be a good chalitza, and if you don't pay me $200, then the chalitza will not be a good chalitza. That's a t'nai kafel when you expressly articulate both sides of the t'nai. And here, he didn't do that. He just said, I'm going to give you a chalitza on the t'nai that you're going to pay me. But he didn't do a t'nai kafel. So it's what we call a faulty t'nai. So the Rebbe holds you need a t'nai kafel, and you didn't do a t'nai kafel. So therefore, we look at it like there's no t'nai at all, and therefore the chalitza is completely effective. There's no zika remaining. So therefore, the lashon of iskacheli v'zika shevamin will have no impact. Umar Sarvar and Rabban know loy b'nei t'nai kafel. You don't need a t'nai kafel. Therefore, his t'nai is good. She didn't pay. The chalitza is not valid. The zika remains, and therefore iskacheli v'zika shevamin is an appropriate way of making a kedusha.
Isn't the chalitza chiyuv? If you don't do yivum, it's a chiyuv derais. It's not a reshus. So
Yes, that's correct.
So can't it be argued that I've seen this in numerous cases that Rabban Shem would say my tzivui is stronger than your tanai. So you can't. I don't recall where offhand, but I've seen it in numerous places that somebody will make some sort of a tanai, but the Rabbanon dismiss it. And it
It's like
has no,
masha kosa b'Torah.
right,
Or you think that you're see here, maybe they could give him patch and force him to do the chalitza, but he has to do a proper chalitza. And maybe the chalitza that he did is not good. So I understand why you would force him to do a proper chalitza, but that doesn't validate a chalitza that he made that might have been faulty.
right. But there is a chiyuv on him to do it.
Indeed, there is. And he's not doing what he's supposed to.
Right, but why should the tanai have to be, a tanai kafel, even if it's a regular tanai? It should be, that tanai should be dismissed.
Well, if it's a regular t'nai, that's the discussion, right? Will a regular t'nai be validated? So there are those who hold that a regular t'nai will work, even though it's a t'nai that's really going against the Torah, because the t'nai is saying I don't have to do the chalitza.
Seems that that's what we paskin here. Right, there's two dots right here, isn't there?
But it's much you need the t'nai kafel, and if you didn't do the t'nai kafel, the t'nai is not a good t'nai.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it seems.
And therefore, he needs a regular chalitza.
And therefore, if the t'nai kafel is required and he didn't have a good t'nai, then his chalitza is valid. And if his chalitza is valid, then the second kedushin would have no impact. I just find it interesting is that we had a sort of a generic machlokes between Rebbe and the Rabbanon. If one goes over to a woman who he already gave chalitza to, and then he did a kedushin, would the kedushin be chal? And by the time we're done, it has nothing to do with that shaila. It has to do with whether or not you need a t'nai kafel. And they pick this complicated case to express a machlokes as to whether or not you need a t'nai kafel. It's very interesting how the machlokes got derailed. So really, this Gemara needs a lot of Rosh Hashiva Shiurim, because for Ravina to take what is a pashat the machlokes about the Lashon Kedushin with Zika and totally derail it and make it about a completely different issue, which is whether or not you need a t'nai kafel, that's very difficult to understand. So it must be Ravina had some real difficulty appreciating all of the previous pshatim. And he was pressed from his perspective, he was forced into a corner, and he had no other way to understand pshat in this machlokes other than this, because this is probably the least likely way to explain this machlokes. The Gemara could have, if the Brisa wanted to discuss whether or not you need a t'nai kafel or not, we could have picked the case directly about a t'nai kafel. Is it a good chalitza or not? May she marry somebody or not? Why did it have to add this additional layer of whether a kedushin afterwards would be chal? So it must be that Ravina did not like the previous svaras, which Ravina must help in a svara, that no matter what type of lashon he said, he meant kedushin. So don't be such a nudnik and say you meant the kedushin be chal this way, that way. He just wants a kedushin. So therefore, it should be chal no matter what. So unless there's a zika there, the kedushin would not be chal. So I'm not saying that's pshat, but I'm saying that probably in the direction you have to go. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. What Tosfos points out is very important, a little bit relevant to what we discussed, and that is halacha. Even if you hold that there's no zika, there's a zika here, and that's why the kedushin is chal. Everybody agrees that the chalitza works and she can walk free. So talking to David's point, everybody holds that even a chalitza b'tos works, and regardless, she goes free. So even if you hold that the chalitza doesn't work and kedushin will still be chal, she still goes free. And that's what Tosfos asked from chalitza mutas kshera. We know that no matter what, the chalitza is good. But no matter what, the chalitza is good. How can you say there's a machlokes of yesh t'nai b'chalitza or not? The Tosfos says the machlokes is only lagaba whether or not we look at it like there's enough of a zika midrabanon to deal with a mimer afterwards and have to force her to give a get. But avada midaraisa, it's for sure good chalitza to the point where she's for sure allowed to remarry. So it minimizes. So that answers the question Why?
Yeah, that makes
Because
a
they're
big
discussing
difference.
whether or not.
Yeah,
That answers why wasn't the question directly about whether she goes free, because everybody agrees for sure she's free. The question is whether Rabban need to get for this mimer afterwards.
yeah, that
That's
makes
true
more.
for every year Shiloh too, because you were saying how you talking, how can I make a tnai and say my chalitza is not valid?
Right.
So valid
So
is
what
valid.
it boils down to a Rabbanan issue.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Cholatz v'asa mimer v'nosan get ubal. So if you remember, we had two sets of cases. There was a set of cases that started with chalitza, and we say no matter what happened after that chalitza, it doesn't matter. It's loiklum because the chalitza has effectively removed any zika. So the mimer afterwards would have no tfisa. And we also had a series of cases that started with a bias of ibum, and we said once the bias of ibum was done, there's nothing else that has any impact afterwards. Mimer doesn't have any impact. Get doesn't have any impact because the bias effectively eliminates the zika. But the Lashon Mishnah only mentioned ein dacher chalitza klum. The Lashon Mishnah never said ein dacher bias. So we said at the time that it means the same thing. When it says ein dacher chalitza klum, it means both. But here's where the Gemara said it. So there we saw it in Rashi. Rashi got that information from this Gemara. And many of the little shticklich that we're going to learn today, Rashi has already taught us, but Rashi obviously got it because he wrote his parish after he learned the Gemara at least once. So he already knew that the Gemara said it. Maybe even he learned the Gemara even multiple times before he wrote the parish. That's also possible. So Zok the Gemara. Why didn't it say ein achar bia klum as well? So the Gemara, Abaye and Rava, Tony, Abaye and Rava actually have a different version of our Mishnah, and they say that it doesn't say ein achar chalitza klum. It actually says ein achar bia klum. So the question is, if you have a choice of using one or the other, why did they use ein achar? So why Abaye and Rava learned ein achar bia klum is because of ein achar bia klum for sure ein achar chalitza klum. So the Tanadi Don. Why didn't our Tana say ein achar bia klum? So the Gemara, because Yevamos they were more interested in expressing the halacha that she's muter l'shuk. If he does yibam on her, she's not muter l'shuk. She's not married to him. But chalitza frees her in Gadsden. Let's see Rashi. Tani ein achar bia klum, which was Abaye and Rava's version. Once the lashon of the Mishnah is ein achar bia klum, which self-understood that ein achar chalitza klum. Even the Tana, ein achar bia klum, once it says there's nothing valid after the bia, hu adin nami, the same halacha would apply to ein achar chalitza klum. V'lishna kalila hu lemisni chada oy bia oy chalitza. So they hold that either one is good, and once we know one, we know the other. In other words, once you deal with the zika using the deraisa proper method, there's no other impact afterwards. The last thing that the Mishnah was discussing was the set of cases that started with a bia, not with a chalitza. So why didn't it refer to the last set of cases like Abaye and Rava choose? And it says ein achar bia klum. It's mishum deheter Yevamos l'shuk chavivele la'aruye. The Tana wanted to focus on being matter this lady completely. And once it says ein achar chalitza klum, we know by definition the same thing would apply to the bia. We don't do that. We're not going to be mitriach the Tana to write both. He's only going to write one, and we're not going to be mitriach. It's a tircha for the Tana to mention both. Okay, very simple. Echad yevama achas shtei yevamos. Whether it was one yavam or whether it was one woman or two women, it doesn't make a difference. So our Mishnah will not be consistent with the Ben Azai that we just learned 2 days ago as one of the people who illustrate this concept that there's a strength to a mimer because the first mimer works, which doesn't let the second mimer work. The Tanya we learned, Ben Azai Omer, yesh mimer acher mimer, there is mimer acher mimer, b'shnei yevanim v'yevam achas. If there's two males, v'yevam achas, but only one almana, there you say yesh mimer acher mimer. But the ein mimer acher mimer, b'shtei yevamis v'yevam echad. But if there's two almanos and only one yavam, then you say ein mimer acher mimer. So in this respect, in the second half of what Ben Azai said, we see that he does give strength to Maimer in a certain way, because in this particular case, he says, Ein Maimer Acha Maimer. The problem is our Mishnah says, Ein Maimer Acha Maimer regardless. Yet Ben Azai holds that if it's one Yevam and two Yevamin, there is Yesh Maimer Acha Maimer. In other words, two brothers, if one does Maimer, the other one's Maimer will have an impact. That is not the way our Mishnah stated it. So Ben Azai clearly argues on our Mishnah. Let's see Rashi Dloik Ben Azai. The Amar Ben Azai said, "Ein Maimer Acha Maimer b'shtei Yevamos b'yavam echad." There's no Maimer Acha Maimer if there's one man and two women. Umas Nisin, and he learns the Mishnah b'shtei Yevamos b'yavam echad kamar. But our Mishnah does say even by one Yavam and two Yevamos. We'll listen about. Okay, let's skip the second lashon that Rashi quoted earlier. It gets complicated. So nevertheless, so you see that our Mishnah disagrees with Ben Azai. Zok the Gemara weiter. Ketzad Maimer Lezu. So the Mishnah says, let's look back at the Mishnah because it'll be easier for us to appreciate what the Gemara is talking about. So Rashi is kind enough to quote the Gemara for us. So if I look at the second from the bottom line of the skinny Rashi's, Rashi is Lemel Mesayle Kishmul, a Maimer Lezu v'cholotz Lezu Koi. What case are we trying to prove from? It's always frustrating when the Dibra Maskal of the Gemara enters the V'chulu, and then you don't know which specific case of the Mishnah the Gemara is trying to bring a raya from. But thankfully, Rashi came to the rescue and told us the precise case that we need to focus on. So in the case of the Mishnah of Maimer Lezu, V'cholotz Lezu, so first he did a Maimer to one woman, to one Almana, to Almana A, and then he did Chalitza to Almana B, Koi. So what was the case of Almana Lezu v'cholot Lezu? Let's actually look back to the Mishnah and see what the Mishnah says the halacha is of Maimer Lezu v'cholot Lezu. We get to focus. Maimer Lezu v'cholot Lezu. Okay, let me see where I can find it. Maimer Lezu v'cholot Lezu. So he did Maimer to Almana A and Chalitza to Almana B. So the halacha is Harishayna, the woman who he did Maimer to, tzricha get. She needs a get to pater up her Maimer. But the Chalitza to the second woman is perfect, right? That's what the Mishnah says. So Zok to Gemara, Lema, let's say that this halacha, that the Chalitza is done to the second woman, the Maimer is done to woman A, to Almana A, and she gets the get, and then the Chalitza is done to woman B. Lema Messiah L'Shmuel, this should be a riot to Shmuel, with Haba to Yufta Rabbi Yosy, and it should slug up Rabbi Yosy. And Rashi says so beautifully. Zokt Rashi, and now I'm on the first wide line of Rashi, Messiah L'Shmuel, it'll be a riot to Shmuel. The Omar Cholot L'Bas Maimer L'Nifter Atzaros. Why did it say Maimer Lezu v'cholot Lezu? Why did it say you made Maimer to Almana A and Chalitza to Almana A? Then it's enough. All you got to do is give a get to Almana A. That's not the case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah's case is you did Maimer to woman A and you did Chalitza to woman B. Why did the Gemara have to do that? Why did the Mishnah have to do that? Wouldn't that indicate that if you would have done Chalitza to Almana A after you did Maimer, that would be a compromised Chalitza, because we say that's a Chalitza psula because you couldn't have done a B anymore, and therefore maybe it would not be a good Chalitza to pater tzara. And that's what Shmuel said. Whenever you have a compromised Chalitza, you need to give Chalitza to every single one of the Almanas there. So this should be a raya. Shmuel holds that if you did Chalitza to the woman that you did Maimer with, and there's another Almana there as well, you have to give them both Chalitza. The Kiva and the boy get Lemamorai, since you did Maimer, and now the Maimer will require not only a Chalitza, but a get as well. Loy have a Chalitza mal Yosa, that's not called a grade A Chalitza, Lafuke Zika de Chavert, to eliminate the Zika of her friend. So since the Mishnah perfectly picked a case where the Chalitza was done to the other woman who didn't receive the Maimer, that should indicate that the Mishnah holds like Shmuel, because otherwise the Mishnah's case could have been where you did mimer and chalitza to only one of the two women, and that will pater them both. That's one right. There's also with Yufta the Rabbi Yosef. This also slows up Rabbi Yosef, because if you remember, Rabbi Yosef said that if there's two almonas and the one is anyway possible to marry a kohen, don't go passel the other one and mess up her chances. So the woman who had mimer is going to need a get. So give her the chalitza. Why give the chalitza to the other woman, and now both women cannot marry a kohen? Better give chalitza to the same woman who you did mimer to, who's going to need a get, and therefore she'll be possible to kahuna, but at least her ko-almona will not be possible to kahuna. So for the fact that it says, no, don't give chalitza to the woman who did mimer, who you did mimer on, who's anyway going to be possible to kahuna. The dafka give mimer, give the chalitza to the other woman, and now you're disqualifying both women from marrying kohanim. Our Mishnah clearly does not hold like Rabbi Yosef that that's a concern. Zok to Gemara, that's not a raya at all, not a shmuel, not Rabbi Yosef, because it doesn't say lechatchila that's what should be done. The Mishnah is coming after it was already done. Chalatz katani. The Mishnah is talking about if he did mimer and on one and did chalitza on the other one, what is the halacha? So the halacha is you give a get to the first one, but the Mishnah is not prescribing that's what you should do. The Mishnah is reacting to a case where that was done already. So you cannot bring a raya from the Mishnah what should be done lechatchila. It's b'diavad. We're talking about here how you rule on it after it was already done. Okay, then we have another series of cases. Chalatz v'chalatz. So if you remember, twice our Mishnah quoted what happens after chalitza was done. If a whole different series of things were done, if bambi was done after chalitza, if mimer was done after chalitza, if get was done after chalitza, and it had the same question with yibum, that happened twice in the Mishnah. So we're actually going to be dealing with the same thing we dealt with a moment ago, because the Mishnah always concludes these sets of cases with einach chalitza klum. It says that twice in the Mishnah, einach chalitza klum. And we asked earlier why didn't it say einach rabia klum, and here we're asking exactly the same question. But listening now einach rabia klum, and the teretz that the Gemara answered earlier is identical to the teretz that we're going to say now. Abaye v'Rava tani einach rabia klum. The Tanidon hatarash Yevamos l'shuk adifalei. So the same way we explained the earlier part of the Mishnah, that's how we're explaining the second part of the Mishnah. Okay, ben Yavam echad l'shnei Yevamos. Zok Gemara. The Mishnah says over here. The Mishnah says over here. It doesn't make a difference if there's one Yavam and two Yevamos, or two Yavam and two Yevamos. Either way, the mimer will not work after the chalitza. So let's see the Gemara here. Zok the Gemara. If you remember, back on Daf Yud, we had a machlokes. We know there's a halacha of once you do chalitza to a woman, it's shuvla yivna. There's no longer the iser eshazach that has a chi of kares anymore. But now, if the yavam has relations with the yavama, there's merely an iser lav. It gets downgraded from an iser kares to an iser lav. What about if there's other brothers? If there's other brothers, are they also downgraded to an iser lav if they have relations with this woman? Or what if there's other almanas there? This person who did chalitza to only one of the women, the other women, are they also downgraded to the iser lav? Or no, by them it all remains the same to an iser kares. So Rabbi Yochanan holds that once one of the brothers does chalitza, then all of the women and all of the men are all downgraded to an iser lav. Rabbi Yochanan kula beisa belavkoi, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that everything got downgraded to a lav, itrach lashminan. I understand why. I need to know that if any of the brothers do mimer after one brother does chalitza, that the mimer has no validity. Einachar mimer klum, einachar chalitza klum. Why? The ein kedushin toisim b'chai v'elaven. The chiddush is that ein kedushin toisim b'chai v'elaven. The mimer doesn't work because ein kedushin toisim b'chai v'elaven. It's only a chi of law for any of the brothers to make kedushin on any of these women. And Mishnah says not chal at all. Why? Because our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Kiva, who holds ein kedushin toisim b'chai v'elaven, and that's the chiddush. Although the Reish Lakish Amar Kula Beisa B'Karis, according to Reish Lakish, who holds that after this point, once one brother does chalitza, if any other brother tries to do mimer on any of these women, there's going to be a chiv kares involved. Itzrich lashmina on the kedushin toisim b'chai b'krisos. I don't need the Mishnah to tell me that kedushin is not toivus b'chayvik krisos. So why b'chlal did the Mishnah have to mention that if someone does mimer after one of the brothers already did chalitza, but the mimer has no validity? Why would our Mishnah even need to mention that? Amalach v'shlokish, zok shlokish. So you have a kash on me. Why the Mishnah mentioned the case that was pashut anyway, that mimer wouldn't work after chalitza because ain't kedushin toivus b'chayvik krisos. But you want to know something? If we analyze the Mishnah carefully, there's a lot of cases in the Mishnah that are no chiddush. They're just mentioned because we're trying to stick to the same format up and down. And I'm going to illustrate to you some of these cases. And these cases were actually illustrated to us in Rashi when we learned the Mishnah as cases that weren't relevant. And these are the cases. L'chamech, seifa, the katani bo of asa mimer. If you do bia and then you do mimer, the mimer has no validity. Itrich lashminon, then kedushin types of basis ish. Do I need a Mishnah to tell me that once someone did bia, which means this woman is a full Ashes ish, that a mimer on her won't work? Everybody knows that. That's also an extra case. Since the case was mentioned and it was relevant in an earlier case in the Mishnah, even though in this case in the Mishnah it's pashut, the Mishnah repeats it because the Mishnah wants to stick to the same format. So all of the different cases that you're suggesting might be extra, you're right, they might be extra. But since the Mishnah is sticking to the same format throughout, there are several cases in there that might not be a chiddush. Okay, we're hopefully going to be able to finish the parak today, and maybe even start the next parak, but we'll see. So once again, Rashi is kind enough to tell us which case specifically we should focus on. There was one Yovem and one Yevam. We just said that this was one of the cases that was relevant, that does provide a chiddush. So, fair to Gemara, let's really see if there's a chiddush there. I understand if he did chalitza and then mimer on the same woman, itzrich. I need the Mishnah to tell me that the mimer has no impact. Why? So kadaita chamina. I would have thought nigzer mimer the basar chalitza, atu mimer the kama chalitza. Sure, mimer after chalitza has absolutely no validity. I don't need a get, but maybe we should require a get. You know why? Because if mimer was done before the chalitza, then the get would have been required for the mimer. And we don't want people to say, hey, if you don't need a get for a mimer that was done after chalitza, maybe you don't need a get for mimer at all. And then if mimer was done before chalitza, they wouldn't require a get. So the Mishnah is telling us that you don't make such a gzeira. Mimer before chalitza needs a get, but mimer after chalitza does not need a get. Elacholatz v'nosan get. But what about the case of you did chalitza to a woman and then you gave her a get? Why in the world do I need that case? After chalitza, a get for sure would have no impact. Because what will it do? Who's it going to answer you to? She's already answered to all of the kroivos of this woman. So therefore, what is the chiddush of this part of the Mishnah? If you want to insist that every single case in the Mishnah has to have a chiddush, I'll find you additional cases in the Mishnah that have no chiddush. A guy made bia on a woman, so which means she's his wife completely, and then asa mimer. Then he did kedushin on her again. Or bol v'nosav get. Or the case of someone who did bia to a woman, then he gave her a get. So bishlam of bol v'nosav get. I understand the case of bol v'nosav get. Israch. You need that. Why? So kedai de chamina nigzar get the basar beila. Also get the kama beila. If he gave her a get before bia and then he made bia, then the halach is when we need to give him, he needs to give her a get and he needs to give her chalitza. So I would have thought that if someone does bia on a woman and someone does bia on his yevama and he's koiner and he's her full wife and then he wants to divorce her, maybe not only does he need a get, maybe he should also need a chalitza. Because Am Goizer get the basar beila, or to get the kama beila, and maybe you will need a second chalitza. Maybe you'll need a chalitza. Wait, kamash malon the loygas we know. The Mishnah is telling you you're not Goizer. You don't once a proper even was done, you no longer require any type of chalitza. But I've a ball of a mimer. A guy made bia, he was kind his wife, and then he made kedushin on the same woman. Lamali, I need a pasuk to tell me that has no impact. That's like literally renewing your vows. You haven't accomplished anything. There's no chiddush there. Ella, once again, you're going to have to say, I did the chalas v'asamimer, where there's some chiddush involved, Tananami ball ba'asa maimer, there's no chiddush involved. Why? Because we're trying to stick to a format. The ID the boy lemisni ball v'nos and get Tananami chalatz v'nos and get. So you're right. Not every case has a chiddush, but the Mishnah is sticking to a format, starting with each one of the four options, either yibum, chalitza, mimer, or get, and following through what would be in all the different variations of what came after that. Some conclusions are chiddush, and some conclusions are obvious. Okay, Bismansi, we said that chalitza works fully no matter when it happens in the sequence of events, but bia only works to totally eliminate the zika if it happened first. If the yibum was done first, before anything else was done, to answer the bia midrabban. Our Mishnah that says that bia only works completely to ignore anything that happened afterwards is not consistent with a Tana, because there's a Tana who argues. The Tanya, Abi Yosy ben Yochanan Ishu Shalaim Omar Mishum Reb Meir, Achas Beila, Achas Chalitza, Betchila Eina Charei Klum, the Emtu B'Soif Yesh Charei Klum. So, a little differently than what I said a moment ago. Rather, saying the same hakpada you have, that the bia, you only say Eina Charei Klum. If the bia came before anything else happened, that restriction applies to the chalitza as well. So, Rabbi Yosy ben Yochanan is machmer more than the Tana of our Mishnah, and says that even chalitza only eina charei klum if it's the first thing that occurred in the sequence. And because of that, sholosh machlokes b'davar, because we have a machlokes in our Mishnah about this between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Nechemia, and now we mixed in a third Tana to the mix, who is Rabbi Yosy ben Yochanan. Tana Kama savar, the Tana Kama says, bia deikal migzar gezrinon. Our Tana Kama holds by bia there's a mokum to make a gzeira. By bia there's a mokum to make a gzeira if it wasn't a good bia. So that's where there's a gzeira. But chalitza the lekal megzer, there's no problem with chalitza of doing one chalitza. The whole problem with bia is we're afraid that you'll make one bia after another bia. In other words, you'll be boiled one yavama and then another yavama, or you'll be boiled the yavama and then a brother will boil the yavama. That's where there's a makom gzeira. But chalitza, if someone makes an extra chalitza, that's not a problem at all. So loy gezrina. So our Tana Kama holds you make the gzeira only where you need it. That's for the bia and not for the chalitza. Rabbi Nechemia Sover, our Rabbi Nechemia in our Mishnah holds bia nami lekal mexer. I disagree with the Gemara earlier, and I'm going to hold that there's no makom to be geyser after a bia, even though the bia was done already after get and after chalitza. We said several blot ago to explain the Tana Kama, ligzer bia achar get, mishum bia achar chalitza, bia after a get, we're going to say is not a good bia. Why? Because then people are going to think that bia after chalitza works. We're not worried about that. I disagree with that gzeira, because kivan the chalitza deraisa, since chalitza, everybody knows chalitza is the deraisa different way to dispel a zika. Not like the Gemara said before, that people aren't going to make a distinction between a get and a chalitza. People will make that distinction. And therefore, made the yadi, I don't have to worry that there's going to be a bia after chalitza. Again, I'm not worried about it. The kivan, the bia deraisa, everybody knows that the deraisa way to deal with the zika is bia and not kedushin. Therefore, her made yadi, everybody's going to know. So that's the second shita. So Rabbi Nechemia holds there's no gzeira by bia. The Rabban holds there's a gzeira by bia, but not by chalitza. Now, Rabbi Yosy ben Yochanan Savar to Rabbanan, he holds like Rabbanan the gazer by bia, that there's a concern by bia. There's no concern by chalitza, but the gazer chalitza mishum bia. But he was gazer that a chalitza that wasn't first in the sequence won't be a pure chalitza, because no mistake that with a bia. So those are the three shitas of how to understand a compromised chalitza and a compromised bia. With that, we finished the parak of Rabbi Gamliel. So B'lineder Hadran Alach Rabbi Gamliel, Hadran Alach Rabbi Gamliel, Hadran Alach Rabbi Gamliel, and Be'ez Hashem will start Haba Yevamtai tomorrow.